Next up, I want to tackle something a little bit different. This is a little advanced for a Introduction to Scala course, but I do want to tackle it now, just to give you a preview, if nothing else, of what we're going to get into in the future. So I want to start off by looking at this function that I've highlighted right here, and I'll go over that really quick. So what this does is I call it random name. So it's a function that gets a random name out of a sequence of strings, and then it returns that random name as a string. So again, it takes an input parameter named names. That is a sequence of strings. So it could be a sequence that contains 0 strings or a billion strings. And then it's going to return a single string from that sequence. And it does that by first getting the length of the sequence and then passing that length into this function call. So next int on random is a function, so it gets the next integer, and it gets the next integer between 0 and this length. So if the length of the sequence is 100, meaning that it contains 100 strings, this will return 100 right here, and then next int returns a number between 0 and 99. So that's just the way that works, and I take advantage of that. One of my reasons for pausing was that I could do that on multiple lines, and I'll do that here. So I could say, let's see, sequence length equals names.length, and then I could do sequence length right there, and that would be the exact same code. So maybe that's a little bit easier to read, and I'll leave it that way for now. And then finally, the last line here says names is the sequence right here, right? So random num is the number between 0 and 99. So I pass it in here. So let's say the number here is 50. And that means this line right here says, get me index value 50 out of this sequence of names. So again, imagine there's 100, and we're just grabbing the 50th name, and we're returning that as a string right there. So that's the way it works. And then down here, I just have a Scala 3 main method. I named it generic, so you can name that whatever you want to. I start off with a sequence of names right here, and then I pass those names into random name. So I get a winner, and then I print that winner. So let me make sure that's saved. Then I can come over here. This shows that I have the file generics.scala right there. And then I can use Scala CLI to run that. And when I run that once, I get Ernie. If I run it again, remember that this is random, so then I get Bert. Bert again. Bert is really popular. And Ernie and Oscar. So that shows that those are random results. And now for me, a key to understanding generics, or when to use generics, is you can look inside the method body. So what I mean by that is right here, I call this a sequence of string. But if you look inside the method body here, there's nothing inside this body, to be clear. There's nothing inside of here that depends on this being a sequence of strings. It does depend on it being a sequence because I treat it like a sequence here and here, but there's nothing that requires this to be a string. So really, once you get used to this, this is screaming out that this should be a generic parameter right here. Instead of being string, it could also be, let's say, an int, and it could be a double, and so on and so forth. It could be any value inside of here. So you could almost think of that as being like a star parameter. And the way you deal with this in Scala is you have to first come over here and say, dear Mr. Compiler, I'm about to use a generic parameter, and I'm going to call that A. And in Scala, that's our naming standard. We typically begin with the letter A. Then if we had another generic parameter, we would call that B, and then another one would be C, but we just need A for this case. So this part right here is just a warning to the compiler and maybe the reader of your function. Hey, there's about to be a generic parameter here. And then I replace, remember that this was a string, and now I replace that and I say A can be anything right here. And an interesting part about this algorithm is that this part of it right here returns an element from names. So that implies that this also has to be an A. And actually, this is a very common way for me to develop a generic function because a lot of times I'm just thinking here about this thing being a string or an, as it was, or an int, or whatever it is I'm working with. And then a little light bulb goes off in my head and it says, Al, you don't need to know that type inside here, so you can make that a generic, and then that becomes more flexible for you and for everybody else. And so now that that is a generic, let me expand this just a little bit more. I can keep this first part of the code right there, and again, that's part of that main method. And now what I'm going to do here is I will show you that we can also do numbers, and I will say nums equal, and we'll use some of the tricks I've shown before. So I'll create a range of 1 to 100. I'll convert that to a vector, and then I will just say val random number equals, and I'm going to call, and now I need to change this thing, don't I? Because it's not random name anymore. So we can just call it random thing. Or how about random element? That sounds a little more technical, right? Random element. So I take that, and I'm going to need that right there. And then I'm going to need that right there. So random element from nums. And then I'm going to print line on random num. Random num right there. So that looks pretty good. And then we can go back here and run that guy again. So now I should get output both from the string. So Ernie is my random string and 59 is my random number. And then we'll do that one more time and you'll see some more randomness, and more randomness. So again, just to recap, I started off, this guy right here was a sequence of string. And then I said, Al, there's nothing here that requires that to be a string inside that sequence. So you can make that a generic. And then everything else here, this is just some syntax that you have to do for the Scala compiler. And this part here is a little bit unique to this algorithm. And it's just because I'm returning an element from the sequence. So this type that I'm returning here and I declare here just needs to be the same type here. And so for right now, in this Introduction to Scala 3 course, I just wanted to take this real quick look at generics. So we'll come back to this more in the Advanced Scala course and then in the Functional Programming courses. So I just wanted to give you a little taste of this now.